During the winter of the Texas Revolution on December 20th, 1835, several schooners carrying military militia members from Georgia landed at Velasco, Texas. These militia members that disembarked on Texas soil for the first time were answering Texas' call for freedom and were ready to join Texas in her struggle for independence. History remembers this militia stepping on Texas soil for the first time as the Georgia Battalion of Permanent Volunteers. Welcome to TVC History. My name is Michael Clark, your history ambassador. And today, we have to talk about what was one of the Revolution's greatest militias and the historic chain of events that introduced a brave battalion of young Georgians who volunteered to fight for Texas liberty in our video presentation entitled Debt of Honor.
But first, let me welcome you if this is your first time on our TVC page. You're at the right place if you love and appreciate Texas revolutionary history. We're glad you're here, so please hit the like and subscribe buttons and become part of our family. Additionally, if you don't want to miss out on any future videos, hit the bell notification button right now so you can catch all our stories. Also, please support our efforts at the TVC by purchasing cool Texas-themed merch from our online store. Check out our vast selection of patriotic Texas-themed tees, available in several vibrant colors, and both short and long sleeves. The link to our store, TVC Promo Gear, is provided in the description section. And finally, if you want to learn more about the Tejanos and their participation in our Texas Revolution, remember to order your copy of our book, Tejano Volunteer Company, Stories of Our Texas Revolution, available on Kindle, paperback, and hardcover. The link to request your book is also in the description section below. Now let's get back to our presentation.
On that cold morning, a little over 200 young patriots, average age 25, from mostly Macon, Georgia, disembarked as a unit, ready to serve. History remembers the man leading this group of freedom fighters as William Ward of Macon, Georgia. At noon on December 22, 1835, in front of a small gathering of Texian military representatives, the Georgia Battalion of Permanent Volunteers unfurled their colors and officially presented their service to Texas. The journey of the Georgia Volunteers started in late 1835 at an historic meeting. On November 12th of that year, William Ward hosted a meeting at his home to organize a militia from his hometown of Macon, Georgia. That evening, during that historic revolutionary meeting, $3,136 was raised to send volunteers to aid the Texians. Ward planned to march this company of volunteers to Texas and engage in the fight for Texas independence. William was the son of Revolutionary War veteran Leonard Ward and wanted his unit to be the best military unit anywhere. So he supplied his men with new uniforms, hats, boots, and all necessary items for war. But regarding hardware, rifles, pistols, Ward went straight to the top, the Georgia State Military Arsenal. History remembers that the militia of volunteers from Georgia would be equipped with the latest state-of-the-art weapons. Ward enlisted and signed about 120 volunteers from Macon and surrounding areas and formed 3 companies. Then he supplied, armed, and prepared the logistics to transport his battalion military unit to Texas. After a brief training stint, Captain Ward organized his men. Then, after family goodbyes and in full uniform, the battalion started their journey to Texas. The Georgia Volunteers marched for almost a full day and arrived to their first scheduled stop for a rest, the town of Knoxville, Georgia. The town received them as heroes, treated the young volunteers to Knoxville, Georgia hospitality, and honored them with dinner. During this dinner honoring the battalion, a young lady, Joanna Troutman, had designed and created a flag that she presented the unit with. That flag became the Georgia Battalion's fighting colors. That historic Texas revolutionary flag became famous as the Troutman flag. Of all the American states, Georgia was the only state to provide arms during the conflict, from its state arsenal to its Texas volunteer force. Therefore, the Georgia Battalion left for Texas armed and equipped with the latest military weapons. But there was a catch. The hardware given to the Georgia Battalion was a loan. The state of Georgia expected Ward, or the new Texas government, to someday pay for the military assistance. and Captain Ward agreed. From Velasco, the Georgia Battalion marched to Refugio and organized and elected officers upon arrival. At Refugio, Ticknor's volunteers, the Alabama Grays, were added to the unit. The Georgia Battalion then marched with Colonel James Fannin to Goliad, where Amon B. King's Kentucky militia, the Paducah Volunteer Company, also became part of the force. With the arrival and addition of the Georgia Battalion, Fannin reorganized his provisional regiment, garrisoned at Fort Defiance, La Bahia at Goliad, into two battalions, the 1st, or Georgia Battalion, and the 2nd, the Lafayette Battalion. The former included the 5 militias of Amon King, Isaac Ticknor, James C. Wynn, Uriah Irwin Bullock, and William O. Wadsworth. The Georgia Battalion stationed at Goliad, Fort Defiance, was now the most significant, the largest, and the best-equipped military unit in the Texas Revolutionary Army. The first time the Georgia Battalion served came as a rescue mission. After Fannin removed all military presence from Refugio, a small group of citizens was left behind, and an advanced recon element of the Mexican army called Carlos de la Garza's Tejanos was now closing in on Refugio, and following right behind them was the Mexican army. So Fannin ordered a rescue of those families left behind. Fannin's choice to lead the recovery. Captain Amon King's militia, the Paducah Volunteer Company, a unit of volunteers who had recently joined the Georgian Battalion. Not long after leaving for Refugio, Captain King sent a messenger back to Fort Defiance to Colonel Fannin to request more reinforcements. To rescue the rescuers. History remembers that Captain King had an opportunity to evacuate everyone from Refugio successfully. Still, upon learning about Carlos and his Tejanos, he chose to stick around long enough to punish and prosecute this foe. Unfortunately, that didn't work out because King's adversary was more significant and better equipped to fight than he had anticipated. So now King and the families were surrounded by Carlos and his men at the mission in Refugio, Texas. History remembers that on March 12, 1836, Colonel Fannin ordered Lieutenant Colonel Ward and the Georgia Battalion to march with all due haste to the mission and rescue everyone there. Interestingly enough, Ward and the Georgia Battalion arrived at Refugio with enough time to successfully rescue everyone and return to Fort Defiance. But again, Captain King insisted that he and his men needed to punish Carlos Tejanos. When Ward reminded King that he outranked him, King retorted, "I was here first. This military operation is my rescue mission." Eventually, the Mexican army arrived on March 14th. The Georgians became besieged and surrounded by General Urrea and the Mexican army, who instantly ordered a 1,200-man cavalry charge of soldiers and Indian auxiliaries. Ward's Georgians successfully repelled 4 Mexican cavalry charges of similar strength that afternoon. However, the Texians caused significant casualties to the Mexicans, while the Georgia unit only suffered 3 wounded. By the end of fighting that day, the Georgia Battalion was seriously low on ammo. Nevertheless, a dispatch reached them from Fannin, ordering Ward to march immediately to Victoria. That day, after dark, Ward and the Georgia Battalion slipped from the mission and quietly started marching toward Victoria. Captain King and his men decided to stay behind. After a hard struggle, the Mexican army defeated Captain King and his Paducah Volunteer Company, then lined them up against the mission wall and shot everyone. As promised, took no prisoners. The Mexicans left their bodies where they fell. Later in the day, the Mexican army caught up with and defeated the Georgia Battalion near Victoria. The Georgians had become bogged down in a marsh and out of ammo. The Georgia Battalion surrendered, was taken prisoner, and force marched to Fort Defiance. Upon arrival, they learned that Fannin's entire garrison had also surrendered a few days ago during a battle, the Battle of Caleto, and became prisoners of the Mexican army. Historians have pointed out that Fannin jeopardized the revolution's success when he hesitated to abandon Fort Defiance, as ordered by Houston, and move his men eastward. Also, Fannin split up his forces unwisely, and the Mexicans took advantage of his mistakes. As a result, the stronghold that the Texians renamed Fort Defiance was now their prison. Sadly, history remembers that the Mexicans executed the entire garrison held captive at sunrise on Palm Sunday, March 27, 1836. As a result, almost 500 Texians and Tejanos, including the Red Rovers, Mobile Grays, San Antonio Grays, the Kentucky Mustangs, and the Georgia Battalion of Permanent Volunteers, were executed in cold blood on the streets of Goliad during what became known as the Goliad Massacre. Miraculously, 8 men from the Georgia Battalion escaped the Goliad Massacre during a hail of Mexican gunfire. Despite everything they had just gone through, the escapees still regrouped as a squad, found their way back to the main Texian army, and fought bravely at the Battle of San Jacinto. However, no one from the Georgia Battalion, including Lieutenant Colonel William Ward, who fell at the Goliad Massacre, would be returning home. The Revolution's most prominent, best equipped, and largest Texian militia was no more. There was still the matter of the debt with the state of Georgia for the rifles and pistols given to Ward for his militia. History remembers that almost 20 years later, in 1855, the Georgia legislature billed the state of Texas for the arms delivered to the Georgia Battalion. A couple of years later, Georgia decided to forgive the debt. In 1857, the people of Georgia agreed that erecting a monument honoring Ward's men would be an acceptable substitute for payment. For reasons I don't understand, Texas failed to erect a monument honoring the Georgia Battalion. As a result, the memory of one of the greatest militias of the Texas Revolution, who forewent the ultimate sacrifice on our soil, was lost forever. Until 1976, in a small Texas town, Albany, Texas. Albany, Texas is an extension of and is named after Albany, Georgia. Families that founded and settled in Albany, Texas in the late 1800s were related to the people of Albany, Georgia. In 1835, many families from Albany, Georgia, had a family member who left with William Ward to Texas and was never heard from again. These two small towns have always had strong ties. They have shared newspapers to ensure they keep up with each other's news, which continues today. The citizens of that small town called a meeting in 1976 and voted to right a wrong and to honor that request by the state of Georgia so many years ago. The whole city spent several months visiting all local businesses and homes, collecting money to erect a monument, to honor their ancestors who marched to aid the Texians during its revolution, and to pay that debt of honor. As a result, a memorial was erected in honor of the Georgia Battalion of Permanent Volunteers in Albany, Texas. The Georgia Battalion of Permanent Volunteers was a true fighting militia of our Texas Revolution. This video is dedicated to all descendants of the Georgia Battalion of Permanent Volunteers living today in Texas and worldwide. They continue to carry the torch handed down to them by the brave men of that militia, the Georgia Battalion of Permanent Volunteers of the Texas Revolution. To the benefit of Texas. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Ward and the entire Georgia Battalion, for your service, deeds of bravery, and your sacrifices to our republic. Texans will never forget. Thank you for being with us today and allowing us to bring you this video presentation entitled Debt of Honor. I'm Michael Clark with TVC History. Thanks for watching, and remember, Texas history. Never forget.